Hi, BookTube. Welcome to another fiction review. I've just finished a novel, and to be honest, I don't think American viewers are going to have any idea who the author is. Older UK viewers, you may remember, and that's either because your memory is so good that even news items from the mid-1980s are still fresh in your mind, or you've read the 1996 book by Marjorie Williams, or you've watched the 2022 film by Agnieszka Smoczynska, because both the book and the film had the same title, The Silent Twins. Okay, but for me, I did not know any of that. I was shopping in foils, and this novel was displayed with its cover facing out. So I wasn't looking at the spine, I was looking at the full cover. I know that's a marketing thing, isn't it? It's going to catch my attention. But what really, really caught my attention was that this book, unlike any of the others on that shelf, in fact, any of the others in the bookstore, it was shrink wrapped. Just a tiny paperback, but it was shrink wrapped. And I don't know whether that was deliberate or accidental, but I tell you what, as it happens, I found my usual curiosity elevated by the fact that this thin film of plastic was preventing me from knowing what the book was about. I was going to have to take the plunge, take it down to the tills, and pay for it, and take my chances reading. Today, we are going to review The Pepsi Cola Addict by June Alison Gibbons. Now, this is a new book, yes, because it says publishing year 2023, Strange Attractor Press, but actually the text is much, much older. So let's go straight to my first question. Can I pitch this novel? Well, we are going to meet Preston Wildey King. He is 14, and his emotional life is full of what you might expect, adolescent distortions. He can love as deeply as he can despair, and he can move through both extremes of feeling pretty much within the same day. He's less adept at expressing his feelings. His mental skill sets for reasoning and purpose, they're yet to develop. The narrator also tells us, quote, he somehow failed to develop any sense of adventure. To move through life with Preston, well, it has a familiar feeling. Yeah, I think everyone has been, to one degree or another, a little bit like Preston before they were 20 years old. But with Preston, the novel explores the limits of this chaotic mindset, which feels like downhill skiing without taking any lessons. Okay, so you know that you'll end up somewhere in spite the fact that you lack all ability to make decisions, but you also know the destination will probably be damaging to one degree or another. Okay, let's talk about details before we get into the meat of the book itself. The Pepsi Cola Addict, this paperback version that I bought, very short, 137 pages long, and only 130 of those are the text. Of course, I've already explained where I got the book, and yes, I paid full price. That price must have been on a sticker on the plastic wrapping, because now the only prices printed on the book are the US dollar, which is $21.95, and the Canadian dollar price, $28.95. So I gather then that the book is available to people in North America, which is good, because pointless watching this review, really, if you can't get a hold of the book. Amazon UK will sell you the paperback version for $13.95. Now, I've not seen any secondhand copies advertised yet, although there are, I understand, 10 copies of the very original version of the book, which dates back much, much earlier, but I very much doubt you're going to find them, and if you find them, I very much doubt the normal person will be able to afford them. Regarding the author, this is normally where I give just a short biography, but at the back of the book itself, you will get a 4-page afterword that tells June Allison's story, so I believe more detail is needed. June was born in 1963. She was one of identical twin girls born to Aubrey and Gloria Gibbons. 3 years previously, Aubrey and Gloria had moved to the United Kingdom from Barbados, and Aubrey qualified to serve in the Royal Air Force as a technician. Now, when they were babies, June and her sister Jennifer, they were late to begin speaking. And when they did start to talk, their parents found they couldn't easily understand what the girls were saying. I will leave a link to a BBC documentary which interviewed the family and which notes that speaking was still a problem when the twins started school. And so by this time, of course, the frustration of having to repeat themselves to everyone who wanted to know something from them, combined with More bullying than I think is really reported in the documentary, because they were the only non-white pupils in the school, indeed the only non-white children in the town. So that caused June Alison and her sister to remain silent unless they were alone. But when they were alone, the twins had a rich creative life. They wrote and recorded plays where their dolls were characters. They wrote to pen pals all over the world, and they both wrote novels. June Alison, speaking to the BBC for that documentary I mentioned earlier, she said, "All night long, typing our books out. It meant that we were going to be writers of some sort. We couldn't speak and express ourselves. We would express ourselves in our books. We had to do something to make the family proud of us." That was the year that June Alison wrote The Pepsi Cola Addict, a 16-year-old writing about a 14-year-old. She paid a vanity publisher, as you can imagine, a considerable amount of money for just 10 printed copies of the book. Unfortunately, around that same time, the twins started to hang out with the same kind of dangerous friends that June invented for her protagonist Preston, the kind who led the girls into destructive behavior and drug use. And like Preston, the girls experienced a great deal of loss around this time, and those emotions led them to make more bad decisions. June wrote in her diary at the time, quote, "My nature has turned to crime." When they were both 18, June and Jennifer were arrested for arson, tried and sentenced to an indefinite stay at Broadmoor, which is a high-security psychiatric hospital. They spent all of their 20s there, and while they were being transferred to a medium-security clinic in 1993, Jennifer died. June Alison was much later freed on parole. I am not 100% sure exactly what happened between 1993 and 2023, except I know that the Pepsi Cola Addict was known in the blogosphere, the small press, amongst those who were always seeking out rare books. The 2022 film, The Silent Twins, very likely added to that interest. The small publisher Cashin's Gap brought the book out of obscurity in the same year as the film. David Tibet was one of the partners at Cashin's Gap, and his work was being published by Strange Attractor Press. I wasn't able to find out exactly how Strange Attractor Press acquired the Pepsi Cola Addict. That story isn't on the publisher's website, and it's not on the acknowledgements page at the back of the novel. Okay, let's go into the book itself. We don't need to spend much time on setting. Preston Wildey King lives in Malibu, California. But apart from frequent visits to the beach, there really is no setting detail. And I would not say that setting matters, apart from the fact that it is an American location. I think the story feels like it is an American location. June Alison Gibbons and her sister had a fascination with the United States. And I'm not sure Preston's addiction to soft drinks would seem plausible if he were anything other than an American kid. Let's go straight on and talk about the narrative, the viewpoint, the voice, the use of language. Gibbons chooses a third-person narrative viewpoint, but she doesn't stray at all from Preston's perspective. That's where you stay. What's interesting with this text is that the publishers, in agreement with June Alison, haven't edited the novel at all. They've left it exactly as it was when the vanity publisher first put it out. When you get to the end of the book, you'll find an afterword from Chris Mickle from his 2011 article that appeared in Biblio Curiosa magazine. And about the writing style, Chris has this to say, quote, "It's a juvenile work, of course, full of odd turns of phrase and words that aren't always used correctly. Somehow, this awkwardness of style complements the subject matter and reinforces the inner turmoil of her intensely imagined hero." Now, this is the same impression I got. Gibbons' 16-year-old style really reflects a young love of language and excitement at getting to use it creatively. I can remember that excitement when I was writing in my teens. I remember packing my sentences with adjectives and adverbs because suddenly these words were mine to use, right? They were to make my voice heard. And so who could resist trying them all out and using all the multi-syllable words that I knew because I wanted to demonstrate that I knew them. I didn't always understand the exact meaning, but it was clear that I didn't have any fear about learning. And these are the same impressions that I got from reading The Pepsi Cola Addict. But along with the excitement and the exuberance of youth with vocabulary, you can still see that there's a cleaner, simpler style that comes through in some of her sentences that would have become part of her mature writing. I'm going to quote this passage from page 7. Preston Wildie King was a thin-shouldered, narrow-waisted boy with the muscular leanness and effortless grace of an athlete. His hair was brown, his eyes brown too. They slanted downwards to give his gaunt face a peculiar oriental expression. The tenement in which he lived with his mother and sister was alternatively too hot or too cold. This room remained suffocatingly hot with the contained heat of the day. Preston was thinking he was cold. His head felt neurotic and dizzy. It resembled ice. Now, does this novel fit a genre category? The Pepsi-Cola Addict, it gave me Catcher in the Rye vibes, but I think it might be better to compare it to Graham Greene's Brighton Rock. It tells the story of an anti-hero, a young man who does not find his way. I have heard of one real case of addiction to Pepsi-Cola, but I'm guessing that June Alison Gibbons was not trying to describe a real addiction, but wanted to include addictive behavior in her protagonist to show how it played a part in his downfall. What, if anything, stands out as an aspect of the novel or the writer? Well, in terms of literary expectations, modern Western culture does tend to favor the polished, the mature writing of any author. The publisher's gatekeeping role is expected to filter out writing that's not ready to be made public. Now, I don't think those expectations are changing, but maybe at the edges of the publishing industry, there is now some space being made for writing that has not been so managed. And what you can say about it is that it does capture a sense of the writer in the moment that they were writing. Also, in the 21st century, it feels as though space is being made for voices that should have been heard for different reasons. I think the Pepsi-Cola Addict needs to be read with June Gibbons' life in mind and the abundance of silence in that life. As I watched the BBC documentary on YouTube, and I will leave a link to that in my description box, you could tell that June and her mother and her father and her siblings were probably holding back more than they were saying. The characters in Gibbons' novel, they do the same. They don't communicate everything they feel. They are worried about what will happen if they speak their minds honestly, or they learn from experience that sharing their deepest feelings can result in greater suffering. Is there problematic content in the book? Yes, there is. There is sexually explicit content, and there is a sexual relationship between a teacher and their student. What is the context and purpose? Well, in the context of the novel, the sexual encounters, they are tests of trust. Characters are exposing themselves. I don't mean just taking their clothes off. I mean they're risking themselves emotionally. They're making themselves vulnerable. And they only find themselves badly treated afterwards. So it's interesting, too, that Gibbons has her protagonist, Preston, act as the abuser in one situation and then the abused in another. And that makes an interesting point that Preston's emotional immaturity is a factor that drives both types of behavior. Any suggestions for related or follow-up reading? The investigative journalist Marjorie Wallace put considerable research into a book about the Gibbons twins. She visited them at Broadmoor. She seems to have won their trust. And if you were thinking of reading the Pepsi-Cola Addict, Wallace's book, The Silent Twins, or the BBC documentary, they would give you, I think, needed perspective to help fully appreciate the novel. I'm going to leave links to both, so check out my description box for those. And that's the review done. Now, as part of my Read What You Own challenge, I've got to be transparent, okay, and tell everyone that of my 4 permitted books that I was allowed to buy during these 12 months, I have made one purchase. It was a birthday gift to myself, okay, and I'm reading the novel right now. For nonfiction, I think you probably already know if you have watched my previous vlog. I'm reading Neurotribes by Steve Silberman, which is kind of the history of neurodiversity, the rocky road to understanding brain architecture that's been traveled over, say, the last 60 years, really. I had no idea how far it had all gone back. I could say more because it's a very exciting read, but I'm going to save it for next time. Until then, I hope everybody has got their nose in a really good book. Okay, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.